All right, we're live.
Hey, everybody. We're live.
All right, here we are again. Welcome, everyone. We have a few questions that we got over the course of the past couple weeks, and we're gonna jump right in. We're gonna start with, why do you think people in AA binge more when they relapse? Is there a study that shows that to be true? And Steve is going to tell you all about that.
I don't see Mark Michelle all of a sudden.
We're here.
I can barely hear him. He can't hear me. We have some technical difficulties. We can't hear you either, Steve. Mark and Michelle disappeared. Technical difficulties. We're still here. I wonder if it's on Steve's end. All right.
There are always
I said, Steven, I can hear you. Oh, we lost Steve. Okay. We're going to go on, and are we? I'm hoping we're live. If we are, I'm going to keep going. I agree, addiction is not a disease like other diseases, but the AMA says it is. Does that make it set in stone, Mark?
Well, let me read the question again. I agree, addiction is no disease like other disease, but the AMA says it is. Does that make it set in stone? No, it doesn't, because it's not a disease.
I can't see Mark and Michelle, so I don't know if I kind of don't know what's going on. The video feed is on this side.
We can't hear Steve. We're having technical difficulties here.
Everything was going fine before we started. We're back. Yeah, that's good. Are we live, Jeff? I don't know if we should talk or not talk.
Well, I'm not going to talk until I know I'm live.
Everything was going well. Are we still live? Okay.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right.
Sorry about that, everybody. The system hasn't been working well here, apparently. Addiction is not a disease. It's not a disease, regardless of what the AMA says. It's never been a disease. So it's not set in stone. It's a choice. But one of the things that people say is it's not just a choice. It's a confounding choice for people. When I was drinking and drugging, it was an incredibly difficult process to get through, because I felt hopeless. I actually felt like I was diseased. I felt like I was lost, that I couldn't stop, because it's something that I learned when I was young. I learned the cultural ideal that this is something, that addiction is something that happens to you. So when you have that belief, it feels like a disease, and you'll act accordingly. And but it's certainly not set in stone. And we go through all the myths about that concept throughout the Freedom Model book, and we debunk all of it, from the brain disease theory to genetics, the idea that you have a genetic code that drives you to drink. Most of the problem with the disease concept is this causal idea that there's some force out there that forces you to behave in a certain way. And like I always like the term that addiction happens to you, that it's something from outside of you. And addiction isn't something that happens to you. It's something that you prefer. You prefer to get drunk and high for reasons, which takes reasoning. And I've gone through this in a lot of my videos on YouTube as well. But all human beings, when we behave, I was taught something early on in the very first lesson I learned 30 years ago when the Freedom Model started, by the original researcher, Jerry. He said to me, the very first lesson was, I want you to spend 24 hours doing something without thinking about doing it first. Okay. So there I was, 19 years old, hopeless. My life was a total catastrophe. I had just gotten out of rehab for a year. My life was abysmal. And I'm sitting with this world-renowned researcher, and he tells me, try to do something without thinking about doing it first. So there's a point to this, so stick with me for a second here. So for 24 hours, I was freaking out. I said to myself, oh my God, I don't want to fail this. This is my first lesson, you know? And so for 24 hours, I literally tried to do something without thinking about doing it first. And it was a really brilliant thing that he did, the lesson, because what it showed me is that I couldn't have possibly drank and drugged without thinking and reasoning the process out first, which means it came from me. It didn't come from the outside in. So I immediately started to question everything I learned in rehab, right from that simple exercise, this idea that my mind, my thinking apparatus was the causal agent in this process of making me feel hopeless. So it changed me forever. It changed the way I thought about myself, made me realize that I was a causal reasoning being and that I could move forward with my life and that I wasn't diseased, I wasn't hopeless. And that really, then I could see the charade for what it was. Then I could start to figure out from that point that the disease concept was really about money. It was really about power and money. And that is, it's a lot easier to just say somebody's diseased than it is to really explain that you're getting high for reasons and you prefer it. We're going to get into another question here soon. It's one of the last questions, but maybe we'll jump into it now, which is about trauma and stress causing addiction. And can we go to that question? I think that's the last one on the list, second.
I listened to your podcast and you said trauma, stress, depression, anxiety, none of these things cause addiction. Then what causes it?
Yeah, so read that again because I want everybody to hear. This is a real important question that somebody asked.
You said trauma, stress, depression, and anxiety don't cause addiction, but then what does?
Right. And so the operative word, the word that is the most important word in that question specifically is cause. Now, what I was just explaining is that addiction doesn't happen to you. You're not caused to behave in a certain way. We covered a little of this in the last live presentation too. But what causes addiction is our preference to get high for personal reasons. If a person has a habit of getting high and they like it for certain reasons, they reason it out and they figure out that this is something that's important to them. But you're not caused, because a causal thing, or causal relationship is like a match to gasoline. It's going to light every time. It's caused to light on fire by the match. You're not caused to use by some outside stressor. And the beauty of that is that you no longer have to try to live a trigger-free life. So why don't you guys jump in here and talk maybe a little bit about learned connections. Go ahead, Steve. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you all right.
Okay.
Yay, Steve is back.
Yeah, I disappeared there. I don't know everything that you guys covered. But I think when you another big thing is to say depression causes addiction, right?
Right.
And it's something like 20% of people with addiction have depression. And so and then it works out sort of 20% of people with which way did I put it? Because you can look at it either way. You can look at the depressed community or you can look at the addicted community. And either way, it's a minority, right? So you have the bulk of people with depression don't have an addiction problem, right? So
that's important. That point is important.
Yeah. that's incredibly important. So, well, then there's something different about the people who have depression and have addiction. What is different? Something about the way they see substances in their life, whether that's that they see substances as a solution to that depression.
Or see it as helpful in some way.
Yeah, or they could just be also part of the group of people who just find substances fun. There could be a lot of different things going on, but it's clear that you're not fated to have a heavy drive for drug use just because you have an episode of depression. You're in the minority if that's what's going on. And I don't say that to make people feel bad. I say that to make you feel good. Say like, you know what? The depression isn't fating you to keep using. It really isn't. I was diagnosed with depression. I think they called it chronic dysthymia. I think I think that was the diagnosis. I had 4 or 5 diagnoses with generalized anxiety disorder, social anxiety disorder, some kind of bipolar. I forget which one. And I was getting treated for those things, and the addiction wasn't going away.
Right.
And I was so very upset in my life in many ways when I did finally quit using drugs for good and happily.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, jump in.
Okay, so one of the things that makes it really obvious that it's not a causal relationship is you have whole groups of people, massive numbers of people that live under abject stress, war-torn countries, right, in civil war. If it was a causal relationship, if it was, stress causes addiction, then anybody that lived in a third world war-torn country would have to go seek drugs or alcohol to stave off that anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it might be that's causing it. So we have a world of people, millions and millions of people under massive amounts of stress for unlimited numbers of reasons, and yet they don't get high. Some do. And if you're taught that that's a causal relationship, it becomes one.
Yep.
So that's really important. Your beliefs drive how you perceive your use. So it's very important to know that factually speaking, in a very black and white way, it's not a causal relationship, but it is a reasoned out relationship between stress, trauma, and use. And a lot of that has to do with the culture you live in. And in America now, because therapists make so much money trying to produce trigger-free lives for people, which is ridiculous, it can't be done. There's that causal relationship that's pushed. That agenda is pushed. I don't think it's some conspiracy. I think it's just the way the system has developed.
Well, and insurance. I mean, quite frankly, insurance is willing to pay a whole lot more if you have mental health diagnoses than if you don't, on top of your addiction. But the other point I wanted to make, and then I want to get back to the original question that we had for Steve, was, and we have this in our book, or at least in one of our articles, people get over addiction at higher rates than they get over
all of the mental illnesses.
All of the mental illnesses.
That's in Gene Hayman's book, because it comes up in the epidemiological catchment area study, and it comes up again and again and again. You're always going to find about 70% or 80% of people with an addiction are currently over it, and then at the same time, you only find 35% of people with other mental illnesses are currently over it, right? So, more people are getting over their substance use problems quicker than they're getting over these other mental illnesses.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that couldn't be the case if it was causal.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing that I point out.
They should get over, they should be getting over the mental illnesses at the higher rate, and then the addiction should be following, right?
That's right.
See, the irony was, when I was diagnosed with bipolar, they told me I had to stop my substance use. in order for them to treat my bipolar.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
this. It's
Well,
this
see, I went through that
circle.
too.
Like,
A
this is my
therapist
bipolar
picked me
causing
up.
my substance use. Oh.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
All right,
a
let me get
therapist
back to the
picked me
first
out.
question.
My life was in a shambles, and I was really upset
Right.
about it. But he was like, "I can't treat you until you treat it." And I like I was treating the addiction. I was going in and out of methadone programs, and you know, I was told obviously that like this mental illness had something to do with my substance use. I felt like that was treating it, but no, you know, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Now we're going to talk about why people binge more. Why do you think people that go to AA binge more when they relapse? Is there a study that shows that to be true?
Well,
yeah, there is a study that shows it to be true. We talked about it in our book, and I'm sure Stanton Peele has talked about it before. It was this study done in the late 1970s, and it was done over a few years. They took and they randomly assigned all these men that were looking for help with alcoholism to a few different conditions, and they compared those conditions. There was one where they had these guys in an AA for a year. They had to go to meetings for a year, and they also followed up with them for a year after that. And then they took these other folks and they put them in a ReBT group, which is rational and emotive behavioral therapy. And it revolves around choice about the way you think about what you're doing, right? It says you have control by the way you think about things. And then they took another group and they put them on a waiting list, and they said, we'll get you treatment. And they never did, right? And so they followed up. So they tracked all of these guys for at least 2 years, the year of the condition and the year of follow-up. And what they found out is that the guys in the AA group became 9 times more likely to binge drink in the follow-up than the ones who did the ReBT thing.
No,
9 times.
9 times.
9 times more likely. And 5 times more likely than the folks on the list that never got any help whatsoever. Right?
Oh, so that's big.
Yeah. So
it's worse than doing nothing at all.
And you guys, you told me I was going to get this question. I was trying to find the book, but I did get the exact quote. But they say, look, we looked at these things, and all we can come up with is they're being taught this one drink equals a drunk thing in AA, because they were randomly assigned. They didn't pick these different conditions. Right. They were randomly assigned, and they came out with this finding. So, you know, they said they're being taught that once you have a drink, you're going to lose control, as opposed to the ReBT thing. They said, like, look, you can think about things differently, make different choices. Very different approach, right? So people binge drink more because they get this fatalism in their heads. Now, it's not just being told that you'll lose control. I think that's a big part of it. But I think, you know, you guys can both attest to the fact that there's a social, this becomes your social group, and status hinges upon sobriety, and it can be pretty devastating, because if you violate it at all, right, like you become a bigwig, you're like an old timer, right? You have status, you have like more time sober. Then all of a sudden you have one drink, and it's like, I'm going to go back to being one of the groundlings, right?
A newcomer.
What?
Right. A newcomer. You go from old timer status to newcomer status.
Yeah.
I say groundlings. I use a theater term.
Like that.
Groundling.
Groundling.
That comes from Shakespeare, right? Like those are the people that sat in the dirt up front.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So you become a groundling or a newcomer, and that's devastating. So why not make the most of it? Psychologically, that's what ends up happening, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. This one, we're gonna have some fun with a little bit. Even though it's a serious question, I'm not saying it's not serious. It's you bash all, which we don't, by the way. We're gonna have to answer this in parts. You bash all the known ways to help people with opiates. So what's your solution to it, to actually help people that are dying in the streets? There was some words missing in there. Did you get that?
Yeah, I got it. There were words missing. Were there swear words you took out of it?
No,
It was just awkwardly
it
said.
was just awkward. The sentence was awkward.
Oh, okay.
First of all, can I say something? We don't bash Matt. We don't. We're giving data. We're just giving data. And what people need to understand is we're coming from a position of, regardless. I mean, we started in the 12-step model, and we were, as you know, maybe not in love with it at the time, but we were part of it.
We were wrapped up in the model.
We were wrapped up in the model, and we decided at some point we were going to become objective researchers and not, you know, and take what we were seeing. And Steve has really done the research on the mat, and there are a whole lot of people that are being told now that you have to do this. And then when they go and they do it and it doesn't work for them, just like with AA, they're told it's their fault some way, that somehow it's not working for them and it's their fault. And that is bullshit. It is total bullshit. So what we're going to say is, look it, if Matt's working for you, keep doing it. Great. The answer of whether
I want to say that too, just about if anything is working for you, you shouldn't be looking to us. You really should not. If you're happy with what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't.
Exactly. So, and the other thing that I want to say is, so what is our answer to people dying in the streets? Well, it's to get rid of prohibition. Okay, because when drugs are illegal, bad shit goes into them. You're buying stuff you don't know what you're buying, and you're dying in the streets. That's why people are dying in the streets.
That's exactly. Yeah, when it comes to the, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Well, in India right now, they have jacked up. They've tried to control alcohol consumption to some degree through taxes. They've made it so expensive that the lower classes can't afford alcohol, right? Anybody can afford alcohol here, okay? So you want to know what's happening in India? Thousands of people are going blind and dying from bootleg alcohol right now.
That's exactly what happened in Prohibition here.
Yeah.
That's in the speakeasies. They were drinking the wrong type of alcohol, right? Methyl alcohol.
That's what happens with Prohibition. People would not be, you have something like 20,000 out of the 50,000 opioid deaths are like fentanyl related right now.
That's right.
Okay. And that wouldn't be in there if we didn't have Prohibition. So we're, you know, that's a big problem. But, you know, the other big problem, and this is coming from medicalization of substance use problems, is people taking benzos with opioids, with heroin, with anything. So a massive portion of the deaths are coming from combining, you know, your benzos, which are Xanax, Valium. What is the other one? Is Ativan? Klonopin. So people are mixing these, and they're getting taken out. First of all, I had a friend that went to rehab last year who, you know, he saw like a dozen people get taken to the hospital out of there. They were on Suboxone, but they were also being prescribed for their anxiety benzos.
Yeah.
And so what you have now is, because we're medicalizing addiction and we're saying you have, oh yeah, it's your anxiety, this, that, the other thing. We're putting people into the care. We're making them professional. I hate to say this, professional patients, constantly going to therapists, psychiatrists, etc. And are you hearing me all right, Michelle?
Oh yeah.
I'm reading.
Yeah.
So they're constantly, they're in the system. They're starting to become dependent on pharmaceuticals for everything. And now they're mixing in benzos. And that's also a problem of Prohibition, because if it's hard to get the drugs you want, but you can get something sort of like them from psychiatrists, then you're going to do that.
Well,
this is an unseen twist that, you know, you can't, I don't know if there's a study to prove this, but that is my sense on things. Because so many people that you see now are also getting all these psych drugs.
I agree.
I agree. And the problem with Matt that I see coming down the pike is the idea, just fundamentally the idea that you would take methadone, for instance, over the long term, which is really moderated heroin use under the guise of medicine, would be like me when I was a drinker being prescribed O'Doul's, right? Right? Long term. Well, now, it's terrible stuff. So here I would be being prescribed by a therapist. You must be on O'Doul's for the rest of your life because you don't have the mental capacity to stop yourself from drinking Budweiser. That would be laughable, right? That would be laughable. But that is methadone. That is methadone for heroin. Right?
You know the actress Elaine Stritch? She was a Broadway lady, an old woman. She played the Alec Baldwin's mother on 30 Rock. Somebody that was in a play with her, and she kept a refrigerator full of O'Doul's in her dressing room. And she was an alcoholic. She was a recovering alcoholic. And that's what she did. She drank O'Doul's for a long time. I know this is just a strange aside. But then eventually,
we couldn't drink it.
Eventually, before she died, there was an article about her in the Times a few years before she died. She was having a Cosmopolitan every night, even though she would have been a long time in and out of rehabs, AA, everything person. Is in her older life, she's like, yeah, I can have a drink every day. But sorry, that's an aside.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
No, that's good.
Let me finish my point, though. I just want. It's okay. It's okay. We need some humor with this. The problem with long-term medications to combat heroin use is sort of a ruse, because it's predicated on the idea that you can't stop yourself from taking heroin, that you can't stop yourself from craving, that somehow craving, again, like I started earlier, happens to you. It's a phenomenon that happens to you. And that started in Alcoholics Anonymous with the phenomenon of craving that was pushed in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Alcohol's cunning, baffling, and powerful, don't you know?
Right. Like it's out there to get you. Mm-hmm. So now we beat that to death, and I don't want to keep going there. So the lady said, the question was, what do you suggest? And it's very simple, actually. It's very simple. If you don't prefer getting high anymore, go to a detox. Don't get on long-term MAT, but rather go through the regimen of detoxing, medically detoxing comfortably, and then move on with your life. You really can do that. That's the part that nobody's saying. Nobody's saying you can do this. So the real question is, do you prefer to not take heroin anymore? And so in our case, in the freedom model, we walk you through whether or not you actually prefer getting high still or not. So that's the solution, is deciding and analyzing and figuring out why you like getting high. Maybe you don't like getting high that much anymore. And then understanding the difference between physical withdrawal and craving. Craving is mental. Physical withdrawal is the flu. It essentially feels like the flu. So they conflate those two things, which is a whole nother discussion. We could talk for an hour on those two things. But
we have some comments here. Hi, Katie. I remember you. And Monica makes a great point. Our friend Monica Richardson makes a great point. She says sober living places that are fraudulent also throw people out into the street, and they actually give them drugs so they can test dirty again, so they can re-up with their insurance. There is actually a system in place. She's absolutely right about that. Primarily in the big, like California, Florida, where
the big centers,
the big rehab centers, which are always happen to be in warmer climates, and which it's easier to be homeless in warmer climates, quite frankly. And that's what they do. If you have good insurance, you can get stuck in this system of where you'll be given drugs by people associated with the rehab so that you can test dirty again and your insurance will keep paying.
Yeah, they built the insurance companies. There's some really great exposés on that out there. You can look online at the Florida Shuffle, and there's YouTube exposés on this, what's going on out there. It's scary stuff.
It is all over the country.
What I want to say about that cycle, though, is just the logical. That's just the logical
result
or conclusions to the basic premises of rehab and recovery that everybody has accepted, which is like, look, you're going to keep relapsing for the rest of your life. This is a disease.
It's so
it's going to snap you up at any time. You know what I mean? So in some sense, those people that are recruiting back into the system, like, oh yeah, go get high, come back in. They're just like, I guarantee they're looking at it like, well, it's freaking inevitable. This dude's going to relapse. So
right. So we might as well help him along.
I get him back in here, help him right away. I know he's itching to do it. I'm sure people are looking at it that way. And
failure is worked into the formula. Failure is worked into the formula, and it was
failure and struggle is written into it. Yes, you're exactly right, and it upsets me that those deepest premises of recovery are held by everybody who veers outside of the AA 12-step thing. And they know there's something wrong with AA, but they latch on to these other things, all these other, if you're doing more support groups, and I know I pissed people off by saying this last time, but you're going into the idea that there's a weakness.
Right. That's right.
Right. And that comes from AA.
That's right. That there's an inherent weakness that somehow, and I did a video on this, that somehow the guy who doesn't get high all the time has this much willpower, his vessel has this much, and then the addict only has this much in his vessel. And that, when you put it in really plain terms, that's really ridiculous. But when we attach the word power, that's where that goes. And it's not about power. We all have infinite power in the ability to have free will to choose. So every human being, me, you, Michelle, and everybody, has an equal opportunity to choose differently for ourselves at any given point based on our beliefs and new information we're given. That's what the freedom model does, is it just clarifies all this and makes it real easy to choose for yourself, not with us telling you to abstain, moderate, whatever, that you get to do it.
Okay. Monica makes a good point too when she talks about it's really interesting, and you kind of touched on this, and that is that everybody has their own little thing, right, and that they want to push their own agenda, that they want to push. NA and AA don't allow for Matt.
Right.
And Matt is kind of out in the weeds, and now they're saying, okay, we're going to put you on this, but you got to go through like group therapy. But then they kind of send you to AA and NA, which is really confusing, because you go there and people are like, you're not sober. You're on, we're over here going, all of that's nonsense.
Yeah, you don't need any.
You don't need any of it, but we're not against any of it.
Right.
I mean, we're not, when we say, I think people misunderstand us. When we say you don't need it, we're not saying you shouldn't do it or you should do it.
You should be informed about what it is that is real.
Yes.
And what the results are and why you're doing it.
That's it.
And then you can make an educated decision. And we spent 30 years sifting through all this. Now we are the only model that really goes into saying recovery is the flip side of the coin of addiction. And that recovery ties you to addiction and never allows you to be free. And boy, that ruffles feathers, because even the people that reject, and this is to Steve's point, even the people that reject addiction or AA or NA, they know that the disease concept doesn't work, still use recovery language over here. Right. And there's nothing to recover from, folks. If you have a physical problem, you go to a hospital and you take care of it through detoxification. It's 7 to 14 days. Methadone, it might be a little longer, right? So that's that issue. It's solved. After that, there's nothing to recover. You're not recovering from yourself, because you are the causal agent in deciding whether you're going to get high or not. It's you. It's your mind. It's your decisions. It's your choices. So there's nothing. You can't recover from yourself.
Exactly.
You can only recover if you think it's outside of you happening to you. An addiction does not happen to you. That's important.
I think we can go also to this one. We got a question from somebody about Maya Salovich's book, Unbroken Brain. Now, I interviewed her about 5 or 6 years ago on my Blog Talk Radio show. It was a great interview. Steve has read her book. I've read parts of her book. My only comment on it, because the question was, in her book Unbroken Brain, author Maya Salovich offers a critique on the disease concept and claims that addiction is a learning disorder as opposed to a disease. I was wondering if the authors of the Freedom Model were aware of this approach and would sincerely like to hear their take on the alternative view and whether this is also a harmful myth. My only comment on it, based on what I've read, is that it comes still from a perspective that there's something wrong with preferring intoxication.
Right.
And I don't fundamentally see that as that there's something wrong with that, that you have to be broken to like it. I actually take offense to that.
Yeah.
I was never learning disabled. I don't think.
Yeah, there's no disability that drives you to like getting high and drunk. I wasn't disabled. I was really good at it.
So Steven read the book, so he can offer a little bit more insights on
this. I did not finish reading the book. There's a few things about this.
Did it offend you?
What?
Was it offensive? Is that what it stopped drinking?
No, I mean, I'll tell you what happened is I got a third of the way through. And I had bought this right when it came out.
Yeah.
I knew about this book for a year or two before it came out. I knew that both her and Mark Lewis were coming out with books that were going to talk about learning. And we were working on the Freedom Model. And I was like, learning throughout the Freedom Model you learn this identity, and I was getting worried. I'm like, oh, these two, they're going to write books that beat us to the punch. I know that's like,
no, I felt things like that. We all
maybe that's superficial, but like, yeah, and so I was very worried about both of those books coming out. And I got her book as soon as it did. And I'll tell you, so that was 2016. It was like summer of 2016. And I had quit using, I had gotten over my problem in 2002, in early 2002. And it was great. After a few months, I never doubted myself. For all those years, I never doubted that I was done. And I felt completely confident that I would never have a drug problem again. I started reading this book, and there's things in it about sort of evolutionary psychology stuff and developmental stuff. There's things about, like, if you're abused as a child, it changes your brain. And there was some issues that I went through as a child that I was really relating to this, and stuff about social structure, which I was such an outcast as a kid. And then I've continued to be one as an adult. I don't fit in with my people here in New York, as like in so many different ways. Like it's hard to get into, but I felt like an outcast. And so they talk about how being low on the totem pole with animals, right? Like, then those are the rats that suck up the most cocaine or whatever. I'm not quoting verbatim here, but it was going into that kind of stuff. And I'm reading this, and I start to like feel bad. And for the first time since 2002, I started to think, you know what? Maybe I am doomed to be an addict. Like, I really started to think that, and it scared the shit out of me.
So you stopped.
I had to put that book down. Seriously, this is what happened when I was reading it. It was going into so much neurological stuff and how you get rewired as a child. And, you know, it's all developmental. It's all developmental stuff. So she's very knowledgeable. She presents a ton of great stuff. But that book, as much as it says unbroken brain and addiction is not a brain disease, it brings in so much crap about the brain and how the brain is, your brain problems are going to make you into an addict. And also, it's learning disorder. So remember that. We're saying you learn a preference, and that's psychological. I learn my preferences based on what I think my options are and what I think drugs do for me, etc. That's very different than having a learning disorder. So that book is not like us. I didn't finish reading it, so I can't give it a full review. And I do want to finish reading it and give it a full review, but it was literally scaring me back when I read it. Now, Mark Lewis's book also talks about addiction as learning, but basically what he does is he just goes in and shows how that means that addiction is normal, right? That's very good. That was wonderful. I still think there's a danger to putting it into so much neurological language.
Can I jump in with the neurological lingo? I can remember when I wrote our 12th edition years ago, a decade ago now, or whenever it was, and I was really wrapped up in the whole neuroplasticity part of it.
Yes.
And what I realized is that the neuroplastic changes that happen in the brain, when you really studied it over and over and you did an exhaustive study on it, was just, it's learning. It's normal. But here's the difference, though. And I want to be very succinct about this. What happens in the brain is a result of the things you think in the mind. And it's a rabbit hole once you go down here, but I need to say this. And we think and experience life, we feel in the mind, not the brain.
Right.
So the brain is the processor, the hardware. The software is your mind. So of course the brain has to change. Hardware has to change if it's given new software, right? I mean, computers do it. Our brain is a gelatinous chemical electrical computer. That's what it does. So what Mark Lewis was saying is, yeah, your brain changes. It could be addicted. You could, but is driving a car an addiction? You know, because you become good at it, the brain processes it well. Or now I want to use the driving analogy. When you decide to get in the car and go for a Sunday drive with your wife, you're motivated to do that, and maybe your brain changes. And what if you did that every single day because you love to go for drives with your wife? Your brain would really change. But would we call it an addiction? Yet on a PET scan, we would. We would, because it would look no different than the guy that shoots heroin. It would look no different. So the brain is changing all the time, and basically, who cares? Who cares? It's inconsequential to the whole point. Right. The whole point is you, what you think and what you love and what you prefer.
Yeah.
And you know what? Can I weigh in a little bit more, or do we have a time?
Yeah.
Because there's all this talk in there about circuits in the brain, circuits for emotions and for bonding and caring and, you know, I don't know, all different sorts of things. And this idea about these brain circuits is something that is starting to be overturned. There's, you know, I've been reading this Lisa Feldman Barnett, something, I can't remember her name, but she's a researcher going in on emotions, and she's saying like, we thought there were all these common pathways for emotions, and when you really start to test it, they don't come up, you know. And it's not that you have, you know, they say fear is in the amygdala, but it also like activates in so many other parts in the brain, and it's different for each person. And you know, it's the amygdala, and it's this ancient structure, and you know what? It's not really coming out that way. And she's saying, you know, we learn our emotions, and we construct them each time that we have an emotion. We're constructing something. We're making a prediction about the future in these circuits. So it's almost like that localizationism that Norman Doidge talks about with these, she's talking about the same thing with emotions. And so when you get into all this brain stuff and you're saying there's some fault there that drugs are hijacking, it just ain't true. And then this becomes very important as well when people think that, oh, alcohol takes away my stress because, it gets into, they think that somehow magically gets into some part of the brain with stress. First of all, there is no magical part of the brain. There's no part of the brain for it to hijack, to take away stress, to do whatever it does. It's coming out all over the place.
And here's where we know this to be true and why it's inconsequential. The whole brain change argument is inconsequential. And that is, if you factor in age, I always go back to this. If you factor in age, over 9 out of 10 people that had a drinking and or drug problem get over it, whether they're treated or not. Now, I want everybody out there to hear what I just said. Over 9 out of 10 people get over the problem when you factor in age. In other words, whether you're treated or not, eventually you figure it out and you move past this problem and you get on with life. What we want to do is shorten that life cycle so we don't have to wait for that curve to dip down into the 70s, right? It's always going down, the number of people getting high as you get older. But we'd like to shorten that up so that you teach somebody at 16, hey, if you put a needle in your arm, you could stop the next day and move on with your life. Instead of teaching people, if you stick a needle in your arm, you're an addict for life.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that's where the damage is.
Yeah. Rick weighed in. He's got a really good point. He goes, do you have a minute to talk about why the PDP, which is our positive drive principle, is better than fear? Why it works better than fear? I'm sure that's what I think he's saying, or why people pay a high price are willing to pay a high price for using.
Okay, so the positive drive principle is it's a fact of how humans are motivated. Humans are motivated by their pursuits of happiness. And it's personal to each person because we're each autonomous. We're our own person. So you can have a fearful event, but if you look back at your life, you could have a fearful event and it may have colored the way you behaved after that. But you'll notice that event the fear will kind of fade very quickly and change to motivation towards something better for yourself. So for instance, if you like driving fast, like I do, and you get into a car accident, which I have done, and it scares you, you drive slow for about 5 days, and all of a sudden you find yourself creeping along, getting faster and faster, and the fear fades. And, because we're motivated by what makes us happier. It's actually part of our survival instinct, believe it or not.
Childbirth is a really good example. It's a pretty terrible thing, but I had more than one. So it didn't deter me from having another one. I decided I wanted another one, damn the pain.
Exactly. So fear of drinking or drugging has never been something that's been, you can look at AA, it makes the results worse. If you're going to harp on consequences, what you're going to end up doing is make the drug look more attractive in comparison. So because our mind works on the premise of contrast. It's always trying to look for things to contrast. So if you're constantly harping on how awful things are, you're going to make the drinking and drugging look more attractive because it's your go-to thing that you enjoy.
So can I jump in there on fear too? Like Michelle said, you're willing to go through childbirth again for the whatever joy you find in raising children, right?
Yep.
And when I got my tonsillectomy a few years ago, I had several doctors being like, whoa, you're going to do that? It's really bad. The recovery is awful.
For adults, it's terrible.
Like they're talking about when you're an adult. And a lot of people were like, well, you sure you want to do that? I'm like, yes, I want to do it. I'm having strep throat all the time. And so I was willing to endure that. And that was an awful, awful recovery period. But, you're willing to endure it because of what you're trying to get out of it. And I want to say about like heroin withdrawal is that when people are ready to quit heroin, when they know they want to, they endure the withdrawal. They go through it.
Exactly right.
It's when you believe that there's something better on the other side of it. You're willing to go through it. And the thing is that people don't go through it because they don't believe it's going to be better on the other side. They think it's going to be a lifetime of craving. They think that they've had the best thing in the world, heroin, and nothing else can make them feel better, right? Or if it's drinking, they think, well, I can never have fun again. I'm not going to, you know what I mean? Like, why would I quit? I'm going to be a boring person for the rest of my life. Like, as if you can't have fun without alcohol.
Right.
The second part of his question was, or why people pay a high price for using. People, they're just willing to do it. I mean, the truth of the matter is I boxed for a while, and I've used this example in some of my videos on YouTube as well. As a boxer, you get in the ring, you get beat up, you know, you pay a price. I mean, the truth is you get in there under contract knowing you could literally get hurt, knocked out, right? So
isn't that the goal of boxing? Is to knock out the other person and not get knocked out?
Yes, it's to disconnect the other man from his senses, right?
I want to say another thing about the fear thing, right? Is that people instinctively stick to the idea that fear is what's going to make them stop, right? Thinking about the negatives is what's going to make them stop. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, is because we think objectively drugs are the best thing on earth. So the only way you would stop drinking or drugging would be to just become too scared of doing it, which is, that's a hidden premise a lot of people don't see, the assumption that drugs and alcohol are just great. But the other part is it seems to work at first, often, right? People quit when something bad happens. And so because it works for a day or a week or a month, they think that's what you need to do for the rest of your life. Stay afraid. And so many things in life, you implement something different at the beginning than you do in the later stages. You know, I'm sure there's tons of great examples, but I think of skiing, because I taught tons of people how to ski. You do what we call the snowplow or the pizza pump, right? But if you're a jackass if you keep doing that forever, right? Like you're going to learn how to parallel. Like that's how you're going to efficiently ski and really end up loving it and enjoying it. And so, you know, you have to know that even though fear might be present at the beginning, it doesn't mean that that's the thing that's going to get you through. And it's the same thing for me in theater and learning improvisation. You have to do this yes and some people make you really strictly say yes and when you're creating scenes at first. But if you did that on stage, nobody would want to watch you. If you just did it strictly, you know, and you have to graduate to something else. And so we want to take and shift to the positive thing. And I think people fail to do that. And then they're just feeling tortured because they're suppressing desire with fear instead of finding that they can enjoy.
And suppressing is a perfect word, because when you're in AA and they tell you keep it green, if you don't remember your last drunk, you haven't had it yet. You know, you better constantly think about what happened 20 years ago because you've been sober for 20 years. It's crazy, right? And what you're doing is you're suppressing progress. You're suppressing the very positive drive principle that is driving you to seek out a better position in your life. It's unbelievable how recovery stifles a human. I know, because I was in it for a long time. And deep inside, I was like, this doesn't make sense. I want to move on. I just want to move on. I just want to move on. My positive drive principle was at work constantly. And you see it in people all the time. Now, if you suppress and you go in that direction and you constantly think about that last drunk and you live in fear and you don't move on to a new method like parallel skiing, and you go back to that snowplow, eventually you're not going to ski anymore. And eventually the drug addict goes back to heroin because he says, you know what, recovery sucks. It's terrible. You know, I sit in deprivation in meetings, pining away about what I could once have, you know? And when you do that, and then your mind naturally with PDB starts to compare, it's going to say, well, there's no other options out there for me, to your point. There's no other options. There's just getting high after all. And what do? They get high because they never spent the time to expand their mind just a little to say, there's probably something better for me out there, you know?
Yeah.
So
we have about 5 minutes left. We had another question, which I don't think we can cover in the few minutes that we have left, and that's, can you speak about sex addiction?
Yeah, I was just going to say, why don't we hit that for the next podcast as a heavy topic, because that
could be a
topic.
whole,
yeah,
probably at least a half hour on its own.
Yeah.
I think we need to talk about our products a little bit, and then wrap it up.
Yeah, so I want people out there to know that what the Freedom Model represents is information. It's a book, right? It's a self-help book. And I don't want to peddle this. What I want to do is explain, because people say to me, I hear about it, but I don't understand what you do. And hopefully you get a flavor for what we do by the topics we've talked about. But fundamentally, we debunk the things that keep people trapped in recovery, addiction, and treatment. That whole paradigm keeps people stifled from moving forward. So we have the book, we have Freedom Model Private Instruction for people that want an instructor to walk them through that. And the beauty of that is you can do it from home. You don't have to do that at our retreat. You don't have to read the book on your own. And if you're a poor reader, or you struggle to understand what you read, we want you to have the information that allows you to be free, that you literally can move on with your life.
And we do that over Skype.
Yes. Sorry, it's over Skype. It's video conferenced. And then we've had our retreats for 30 years, where we help people over the course of weeks go through the Freedom Model and really dig in and figure out how it applies to their life. And so they can decide whether they still prefer to get high and in a heavy way, or if they want to adjust their use to some moderated level, or they want to abstain and come to that conclusion based on facts instead of fear and misinformation.
I want to just, Jessie sent a really good question, which we will also address next time. She does a lot. Her husband's a veteran, and she, knows a lot of veterans, and she wanted us to talk about, the idea that people don't have to hit rock bottom. Which is a great question, Jessie. Hi, Jessie. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. We are coming up to the hour. Go ahead, Steve. We got a couple more minutes.
One thing.
Yeah.
People are looking for processes and programs and things to do. And with the Freedom Model, we're trying to bring an end to all of that. Because once you know that there is not an addiction to beat and to fight and to battle, it's really just about figuring out what you want. And once you know that you no longer want to get blackout drunk or want to rely on taking pills all day, every day, once you know that you'd be happier without that, there's nothing you do to not do that. So we don't give people things to do when they leave here or finish the program or the book. We're trying to give you a way to figure out what you really want.
Yeah,
it's so deeply ingrained that this is a lifelong problem, and you have to fight something, and there's something to be undone, and there's just to figure out what you want now going forward and what can make you happier in your life. And once you know that, once you know this ain't working no more, you move forward, and there's nothing to do.
Yeah,
so
because
what do you guys do? It's a weird question, because the premise is that you got to do a lot, and you don't. And we're going to show you that you don't need to do a lot, and that you don't need us. That's my goal.
That is the beauty of it. That you can figure this out.
Because addiction doesn't happen to you, you are the solution. Your mind, you are the solution, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. If you want more information, go to thefreedommodel.org.
You can call us at 888-424-2626. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at the Freedom Model. We're everywhere now.
And YouTube. You can go to YouTube for some of our videos that go over these topics.
Yeah.
Every platform.
We're just out there now. We're really working at it. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching.
For joining us.
Thanks.
Take care.
Have a good night. Bye, Steve.
Bye.